A little bit of technical difficulty, but we'll get underway right now. Okay, before I introduce tonight's speaker, I'd like to call your attention to tomorrow's activities. From 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., Audrey Handler will demonstrate glass blowing in the glass studio of the Engineering Research Institute on campus. And at noon in the Pioneer Room of the Memorial Union, there will be several short films. And the names of them are U.S. Art, A Gift to Ourselves, Matrix 3, Our Lady of the Sphere, and The Further Adventures of Uncle Sam. Okay, tomorrow night at 8 p.m. in the gallery of the Memorial Union here, Charles Christopher Mark will speak on the subject of art and politics. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you tonight's guest speaker. He was born in Italy and came to the United States in 1947, where he worked under Frank Lloyd Wright for a brief time. And Mr. Solari is well known for his architectural concepts and his works, and is the founder of the Costanti Foundation, a working and teaching compound outside of Scottsdale, Arizona. He is also a sculptor and designer, and is the author of several books, among them Arcology, The City and the Image of Man, and the Mason City Sketchbook. And currently, when he is not on his lecture tour, he is working on his latest project, the Arcosanti project. And here he is, Paolo Solari.
I'm afraid we've got a problem. Can you hear that? I mumble most of the time. So you have to tell me if you can't understand. Okay? Can you get the lights off?
Louder, please.
The subject of the presentation is the city and the sun, and it will appear at the end of toward the end of the program. Before I get there, I'm going to go through a certain number of steps in order to explain what I mean. Before I do that, I have a certain number of slides which are just a visual introduction, some kind of a teaser. So I'm not going to explain them. I'll just say that the title is The Two Suns Arcology, which means arcology to reconnect architecture with ecology, and two suns to remind ourselves that we have two resources basically on this earth. One is the sun, which originates somehow the life on earth, and then we have the life itself, which is the physical, the physiological, the mental, and the spiritual. So that's the other sun, the second resource. The interest in the city began in the 50s, and this is an indication of a development according to the automobile of a certain pattern of circulation. So it's basically a logistical network, very abstract. This is a more developed notion about a community of about 2 million population imagined in the climate of Arizona or Mexico or New Mexico. On a mesa, a flat area like a flat top, where on the area about the size of Manhattan, I tried to develop a certain habitat. And at that point, I was beginning to be interested quite well on ecological problems. And as an example, I make this of designing a park in the middle of the community, which is the result of transforming a quarry into a garden. So you quarry the material for the construction of the city, aggregate basically. And by doing that, you change the geology, but instead of leaving a scar, you make this new geology, into a man-made garden. So that was the closing of a certain cycle, where the coming in of the action of man on a certain condition, natural condition, would see as an end result something very lively for the community. Connecting, this garden will be connecting a learning center with a theological center. Other features were processing plant, where you would have the sewage and garbage collected and then treated so that you could get raw materials for industries or for farming purposes, and also water. There were villages organized around the civic centers. Each village was about 2,000 or 3,000 people, with an inner garden and outer space, open space. And those villages were depending on two networks, one of industrial and so-called standard production and marketing, and another one where you would have small industries like home industries. This was still a very two-dimensional development. There were some structures which are very, very three-dimensional. Basically was a flat grid attempting to serve a large community. Eventually I abandoned this approach for the ecological approach, which is the three-dimensional position, and I will get into that later. In the 50s, I was also interested in solar energy, and I was sketching notions where in one building you would organize the collection, the tapping, the collection, and the use of the solar energy, and the building could function as a dwelling or as an office building, or as a combination of many activities. So an attempt to integrate the incoming energy, the use of it, the storing of it, with life and other activities connected with life. And I was trying to make use of infrared radiations, of winds, water, tides, and so on. I then drifted away from this activity because there was absolutely zero interest at that time on solar energy. But I kept some of the ideas, and I eventually developed them. This was how the presentation was organized. Now it's changed slightly, but it began with a methodology which was connected with energies of different kinds, the inorganic energy, and from which I was pulling out the greenhouse effect, the chimney effect, the Abs effect, which I will explain. From the organic energy, I had the culture of foodstuff under greenhouse conditions. In the mental energy, I had the human, the social, and cultural aspects of it. That I call now the urban effect, and I will try to explain why. After going through the methodology, I would apply the methodology, and the first application were the first series of arcology that are published in the MIT book. And then there was a presentation of the empirical process we are developing at Arcosanti in Arizona, with slides about the construction process and so on. And then a second series of arcology, which came about when I came with the sun again within the context of the city. And this is the gist of the presentation, Susan's arcology. Now I rearranged the schedule so that I begin with Arcosanti, the empirical process, the prototype that we are building in Arizona. Then I move into the theoretical models of the first arcologies, then I'll try to explain the effects, and then I move into the Two Sons Arcology. This is the site that we bought about 10 years ago in central Arizona. Phoenix is about 70 miles south. We set up a camp about 9 years ago, and then in the last 8 years we have been building on this ledge. So this is the same ledge looking from the south to looking north. And this is a slope which is going to be eventually covered by the greenhouse, which is going to feed energy and food to the main building, which is going to be built around those structures. This is our land. We use only less than 2% of the land for the habitat, so that we are encroaching in a very minimal way on the environment. Now the process is very, very slow because the means are very skimpy, almost nil. So what we do, we have workshops for people, mostly students from colleges and universities. They come for 5 or 6 weeks, and they pay a fee so that we can buy materials, energy, equipment, know-how, and so on. We match that kind of help with the thing that we produce at the foundation, the Cosanti Foundation. This, by the way, is a meeting before breakfast in the summer. And what we produce is mainly bronze pieces like this, which is composed of many bells, wind bells, ceramics bells. We have royalties from books. We have some commissions. And then my lecturing tours. And those are basically the resources that we employ to build. Those are bronze pieces. And recently I started making sketches, which are also on the market now. This is setting up the camp about 9 years ago. Units for 8.5 by 8.5 cubicles. This was the early model, which has been abandoned in order to introduce the sun in a much more emphatic way. This is the organic garden about 3 years ago at the camp. This is the kind of rocky formation on which we are building. And this was the original design shown at the same scale of the buildings. And the buildings are indicated in blue there. So about 3 years ago we had that much, which is not very much. And about 3 years ago again, I transformed this design very drastically, and you see the model at the end of the presentation. In this early model, I had the apses, which were one of the resources to make use of the solar energy, as I will explain to you a little later. This is a view from the west, from the highway, about 3 years ago. Of the early model, we began to build some of the substructures, like this vault, 2 residences, and other buildings on the lower area. This vault is that vault there. The foundation for this first structure. The use of techniques that we developed at the foundation, which is in near Phoenix. The use of soil or silt from the riverbed, in this case, to shape units, modules, and then use colors, cement colors and patterns, so that when you pour the wet concrete, the concrete absorbs and incorporates patterns and colors. Those are 3 panels of the vault. Again, the same panels, and that's the panels assembled. So you see the negative there, and you see the positive, the structural positive there. That's one of the panels. We use a similar technique when we construct modules for other structures. We use the silt as a bond breaker between the slab and the pouring. This is the second vault we built about 3 years ago. And this is what's now the ceramics workspace. And as a shape of an apse, like an acoustic shell, open to the south, so that when the winter sun is traveling on the horizon, it penetrates very deeply in the building. But in the summer, the sun is very high on the horizon, so the shell itself shades the space. So it's a kind of passive sun machine that you develop in that manner. This is the preparation for the casting of the shell using silt again. That's the use of the silt for forming of residence. This is the ceramic slabs in the construction phase. This is the foundry in the construction phase, where we do foundry work at this level. We do assemblage and finishing at this level, and then we have residential spaces on the third level. That's the ceramics, and that's the foundry. Now this is the rough silt, which is going to be worked into that manner. Then the reinforcing is put on, and then the pouring is going to be done. So again, you see the negative here, and you see the positive later. Those are the residences with 2 studios on 2 levels surrounding the foundry. So that's the form, the negative in silt, and that's the shell, the positive structural membrane. So this is the foundry with the residences and the studios. That's the ceramics. It's one residence with the vaults, and then there is another building, a 4-story building there. That's the foundry. And the 4-story building has some rooms, private rooms at this level with the services on the north side, has a restaurant on 2 levels with the kitchen and services on the north side, and then an exhibition space at the top level. The foundry, the 2 vaults, 2 residences with offices, and then the ceramics in here. This is the landscaping between the buildings, the inside of the restaurant. We use precasting, assemblage, and casting place techniques. All this is done by young people, guided by young people that have been with me for a number of years. So practically there is no professional work. This is a small lab that we are building in the north side of the 2 vaults. That's the ceramics. Now we find out very soon that the buildings were responding very well to the environment. So we began to have sounds and light shows at night originating from the buildings. And then you could watch from the other side of the valley, watch and listen. So eventually we developed festivals. Now we have a festival in October. This year has been the 3rd year. And we had about 10,000 people in 2 days. We set up a stage in the last 2 years at the bottom of this ravine, and then we are developing an amphitheater there, which is going to be taking maybe 6,000 people. Then we have the larger natural amphitheater, which can take up to 50 or 60,000 people. The things are going on in each building. You might have a demonstration in crafts there, you might have a flute playing there, or a piano. You might have dancers in the vaults. So for 2 days we carry on with a number of activities. This year, last October, we had the festival in connection with a conference based on health, self-reliance, and healing. So we had a number of meetings both days. The stage, the lower stage, the upper stage, and there is the sources of sounds and light shows during the night. Those are some shots at the night time. This is Louis Falco from New York, the group. We began with having the welder working there and the grinders working in the foundry. Then we developed light activities throughout the buildings. with shadow plays and so on. And down in the valley we had the main stage, we had a smaller stage along the cliffs going up to the horizon there. This was a meeting during the festival with Betty Friedan. Another meeting with some of the Indian tribal people. Now this is the swimming pool, which is almost completed now, and it's in such a position as to take the heat from the greenhouse, which is developed on the lowest area, on the slope. The hot air penetrates under the swimming pool through a bedrock and vents along this side of the swimming pool. The cliff is also a heat sink. It accumulates energy during the day, so that in the afternoon it's warm and radiates warmth in this area. So this is the swimming pool, which is going to be energized by the sun. That's the camp. This is where we are going to eventually cultivate. We may have a pond here, we have a dike, which is broken now. Now I'm going to go through very quickly the first generation ecologies, which are illustrated in the MIT book. And they are not specifically involved with the sun in as much as they do not capture a large amount of sun energy, but they are related to energy in the sense of, because they are frugal systems, they are imploded, miniaturized systems, so they require much less energy than the usual two-dimensional development of the urban landscape. This was a floating urban development where you have production centers harvesting the sea, clustered so that eventually you have urban ribbons enveloping them. Still the idea of a floating landscape. The dam taken as a device within which you build a community or a specific activity like health, recreation and so on. So you can take the idea of a dam, and by a decision and by design you transform it into a carved out structure where you can insert the life of a community. With the dam comes water for all purposes, from recreation to farming to energy to domestic purposes. If the dam is large, it could be a large community. If the dam is small, it could be just a research center or recreation or a museum center. Some of the models of this first series of ecologies, about 17,000, 30,000, 150, 200,000, and about 500,000. They're very schematic, there are symbols more than blueprints, but they relate the notion that if we can implode the urban system and move from the very big to the very small, we can do many things, from saving resources, energy, land, water, and so on, to desegregation of society, which means integration of activities and people, and possibly to a more intense urban life. This is the Empire State Building compared at the same scale, showing that you're dealing with a large building but with a small city. So the idea is to move from the big into the small. In this case, the idea was for a hot climate where the town itself becomes an umbrella for this platform. This could be a farming community where the inside shows the public, commercial places, basically. This was another example of a community of about 1 million population within an area less than 1 square mile, or 1.5 square miles, I remember. By doing that, you become a pedestrian again. In other words, you encounter people again instead of driving in a cage that drives you around. So you move around, or you can bicycle, you can take elevators and escalators now and then, but basically you're a pedestrian moving throughout the landscape. You can connect with everything which is in the town very quickly. It can be the third generation part of the family, it can be the clinic, the school, the marketplace, and so on and on. You can also move very quickly outside of the habitat into the open countryside. Since there are no automobiles, you don't have roads, you own only streets and walkways, malls, and so on. You implode all the systems of the service systems. And by imploding those, you also implode the bureaucratic machines. So you have less remoteness, less alienation possibly within the context of a city that you can identify with. If you introduce the sun as the main resource, then you introduce another element of democracy. The sun is the most democratic energy available.
Can you hear in the back?
Thank you. This is a very sketchy idea of a linear city, where you have a main logistical system in the center, which in section will be indicated there. And plugged into this logistical system, you would have communities of different sizes, very small, very large, and intermediate sizes. By doing that and by maintaining a reasonable dimension transversally, you could have the advantage of the immediate connection with the logistical network, air, rail, road, etc., an immediate connection with the urban conditions, the institutions of the city, wherever you are within it, and then the immediate connection with the outdoor. When this dimension breakdowns and becomes a very large, then you have the diaspora and all the problems connected with the uncontrollable gigantic layouts that we have in the eastern seaboard, in the western seaboard, and in the middle of the country. The continuity for a linear city would be very important, so these were suggestions for a bridging of a certain obstacle like a river, or a kind of obstacle like a canyon. And last in this series, an idea for an air terminal which could become a full-fledged city. So the hub would be a million population community, and the link with the aircrafts would be through a taxiing ring which surrounds the hub, and the taxiing ring would be served by through the network of landing strips according to the wind patterns. Landing strips, you turn off the engine, the aircraft is pulled in, and you unload practically within the city itself. So you eliminate the gap between the plane and the point of arrival, the city. For this design, that's the taxing lane at the end there. That's a section. There were industries below grade and gardens top of the industries. Those were diagrams that we developed for different kinds of activities to show that within a very tiny landscape you can be very quickly moving into different kinds of actions. So you arrive, then you go to the coffee shop, then you go to the library, then you go to the business place, then you go, and everything happens by walking or by taking elevators and so on. It's having half an hour or 20 minutes or 2 hours driving time between stops. Now I am trying to develop the notion of the urban effect. So I begin from the very beginning presenting the idea of a geological reality which has an offspring which is biological, another offspring which is human, and possibly another steps which is theological, divine. So you begin with the cosmogenesis, the genesis of the cosmos, the mass energy universe, the universe that I call of indifference, and you can read it. It is I have listed here a number of characteristics, relatively speaking, of this kind of the universe, the physical universe. It has insensitive, structural, simulable, predictable, granular, rational, statistical, entropic, insensitive. This is the Earth, for instance, before the appearance of life. Then somewhere, at least in one spot, we know that possibly in billions of spots life appears. So you have the biological universe, the biogenesis, the universe of innocence. It is social, cooperative, sensitized, non-simulable, irreversible, selective, non-evolutionary, durational, unconscious, divine universe, the sacramental way, the theogenesis. It is seminal, aesthetic, resurrectional, totalizing, loving, irreversible, non-simulable, asyntrophic, the universe of transcendence. Thank you. Now, in this process that moves from matter, let's say, into spirit, you move from the relatively simple to the utterly complex. And the process is always moving from the simple into the complex. Whenever you have more life, more consciousness, more interaction, you have more complexity. That entails, in physical terms, the implosion process, this miniaturization process, and so on, which I'll try to get into again. Now, in this development, the characteristic, again, present are cooperation, compassion, liveliness, intensity, interdependence, association, innerness, sensitivity, response, self-reliance, learning, memory, hierarchy, knowledge, passion, anticipation, care, transcendence, reverence, etc. Those are characteristics which are appearing slowly in this process of matter becoming sensitized into a biological system, and then becoming hypersensitized into a mental system, and eventually becoming even more sensitized into a transcendental spiritual system. So in a way you can imagine a physical universe which attempts at a certain point to become a mental spiritual universe. Now, to illustrate the notion of complexity and miniaturization, I take a tree, and I suggest that when you plant a seed, you witness the implosion around this special element, the seed of elements which are scattered throughout the universe. So you have a miniaturization in some sense of the universe within the tree. The tree can be a plant, or it can be an organism like an animal, or it can be an organism like an individual, a person, and it can be a society, and so on. So when you plant the seed, you have minerals, elements, and water coordinating themselves, coming together and working together in the making of the tree. From the air you have basically the light, photosynthetic process where light from hundreds of thousands of miles comes in and it's organized in such a way as to cause the generation of the organism. So this is the cosmos imploding into an organism which is self-propelled, self-oriented, genetically auto-defined, and so on. In a sense, you could imagine that by extrapolation of this notion, the seed, the ultimate seed, would be the cosmos becoming the seed of itself, the omega point of Teilhard de Chardin. Now, this process comes about through the ecological dynamics. So this ecological process, which is never static, it's a dynamic happening event, could be seen as a theological process. If you have some kind of an eschatological notion that there might be an end. So the ecology becomes theology, and the evolution of life through this process would be the evolution of matter becoming divinity, which would mean that divinity is not at the origin, but it's at the end. Now, this is illustrated somehow by this diagram, where the future is an empty socket. It doesn't exist, and life and the evolutionary process creates it. So in this case, you don't have the revelation of an existent reality, as it is in some of the religious theologies, where you have God, nirvana, truth of logos, which exists but is not still as yet revealed. Instead of revelation, you have creation. The purpose of existence is to create the non-existent, and this creation is the slow processing of matter becoming spirit. At the end of the presentation, we can have question and answer, so you might ask some questions about those diagrams. I think I'm not going to stay with those, but I might quickly go over this one, which is a different presentation of the notion that I had in the first diagram, where I begin with matter and end up with spirit. In this case, you have the media, which is the Big Bang origin. So you have the beginning of the universe as a purely a mass energy universe, which with introduction of the parameters of time and space begins to the process of becoming. Within this process, you have nodules of consciousness developing, like on the Earth. So you have a media which begins as a raw, brutal existence, transforming itself into a message, which eventually would be the realm of the spirit. And at the end of the process, since you have the total consumption of time, space, mass, and energy, you have resurrection. Everything that's been in the past becomes present, coactive at that point, at the omega point. Taking the coordinates of complexity and miniaturization are two of the very basic coordinates of this evolution. You could imagine an imbalance where you have idolatry of the spirit, when complexity is taken in and considered very seriously, but miniaturization is ignored. So you have a preponderance of the mental processes with the ignoring of the flesh, of the material world, and this would be somehow a tendency present in the Eastern civilization. The opposite, when you move through a process which tends to be very much in gear with the miniaturization notion, take the computer for instance, you might have a condition where matter is very much manipulated, but the soul begins to die off, so you have the idolatry of matter. The idea would be to find a better balanced condition where both the complexity as a mental process and as a soul process, and the miniaturization in terms of doing more with less, would be balanced and you would have a better chance of developing, of evolving. Now I'm moving into from a very general to a less general kind of situation where I'm connecting the idea of the complex and the miniaturized to the problems of today. So if you take arcology as one of those notions where the complex and the miniaturized is taken into the urban habitat, then you could have the possibility of solving problems in a better way. The alleviation of the ecological crisis, the redimensioning of our use of land, air and water, the reduction of the pollution caused by technological societies, perception of the nature of waste, affluence and opulence, a reasonable sheltering of man on its way to 9 or so billions of people, the resolution of the problem of energy depletion, distribution and consumption, the resolution of the problem of the segregation of people, things and activities, responding to the encroachment of bigness, bureaucracy and so on. The contention is that through the device, through the ecological device, those things could be faced more directly and solved with a better chance of getting somewhere. Now I'm moving another step toward a more empirical and a concrete process, and I'm bringing in those energy conditions, the use of energy and the use of certain morphological system. So I have the greenhouse effect, the horticultural effect within the greenhouse condition, the Abs effect, which is the ability of certain buildings to take in the winter sun and to exclude the summer sun, as I told you a while ago. The use of the chimney effect connected with the greenhouse, where you move air without the need of machinery and equipment and energy. The air moves itself because by warming up or by chilling itself down, tends to move from the position where it originates. Those four effects, to those four effects you have to add another one, which is the ability of structure to accumulate energy when they are, when air passes through them, which is hot or cold. So that's the heat sink effect, which is the storage of energy within a structure. Now, those five effects are organized around the basic effect, which is the urban effect. The urban effect is that kind of performance which is very clearly originated with life from the very beginning. An animal or an insect or a unicellular animal, it's an urban effect in the sense that it has the elements within itself, even if in a very elementary way, which are also present in the city. Intensity, synergy, consciousness, transcendence, frugality, sensitivity, beauty, knowledge, interdependence, coordination, compassion, and so on. So you could say that throughout the evolutionary process, you have the explosion of this urban effect, which could be imagined, carried through the whole evolutionary process, ending up into the notion again of divinity or logos. Now, what we are trying to do at Arcosanti is to take the five effects which I told you and organize them around the urban effect. By doing that, we think that we could have savings on resources, on land, on water, on time, on energy, on minerals, on fossil fuels and so on, and achieve a better ecological sanity. We would cut on pollution, segregation, waste, bigness, bureaucracy, isolation, alienation. And we would be there in a better position for learning, for integrity, for reach, for health, for identification, for cooperation, and so on. So this is the task that we are trying to be faithful to in our very modest construction program at Arcosanti. An example of what this means for a very simple building is this structure near Indio, where we would be building a greenhouse on a slope. The slope would originate this air movement of air which is cold at the beginning and warms up and moves throughout the buildings, you would have platforms where you cultivate vegetables, and then at the end you would have a very rudimentary kind of urban effect where you have a movie, meeting room, reading rooms, and a little museum. Now, I make another step and come closer to the diagram of the two sons ecology. I begin with the greenhouse as a flat surface covered by a membrane. Then I slope the greenhouse so that I introduce the chimney effect. So you vent the warm air vents itself out at the top. You can imagine the greenhouse as simply a skin surrounding a house. The skin can be a dome, like a fuller dome, or else you can take the greenhouse and make it into just a sandwich where you capture the infrared radiations, and with those infrared radiation you can feed some energy in the house in form of hot air, hot water. You can incorporate this greenhouse, this sun collector, into the roof of the house. You can adapt both resources and food production and warm air and warm water fed into the house. You stop the greenhouse so that you feed this energy automatically through the chimney effect. You can take the house and make it into a number of houses so that you have a village or a town or a metropolitan system which is fed food and energy to a very large energy apron made of greenhouses. And if somebody can move the head, two heads, another head, you have the main diagram of the two sons ecology where you add two more effects, the heat sink effect, the ability of the structure to collect energy, store it, and then the apse effect, which is the one illustrated before. So here you have the 5 effects working around the urban effect. And this is the typical section of the two sons ecology. You'll see some models now. Very briefly, again, the action of an apse in the winter, where the sun penetrates and you are sheltered by the shell, or in the summer where the sun do not penetrate. Again, a winter shot and a summer shot. Now, those are sketches which I began to work with. Too many suns. About 4 years ago, I began to work on this diagram, and then we got some help from the Xerox Corporation, from the Bicentennial, so we moved from the sketches to models. Those sketches were working around the idea of adding shades in the summer to large awning systems. And then we made a test model. We exposed the model to a sun machine, and if we had more time, I could show you how the model responds to the different position of the sun on different climates, different seasons. This is March, the equinox. This is still March, midday, quite a bit of sunshine penetrating everywhere. That's June in the morning. The shade begins to act upon the building because the shape of the building. This is December, very early in the morning. 10 in the morning, 21st of December, the shortest day of the year. Midday in December, and morning, 10 o'clock in the morning in June. If you shade this greenhouse, you add even more shade. Now the idea here is that basically, again, the use of those 6 effects together, the energy apron of the greenhouse is exposed to the south, the food fed into the community, and also the energy fed in terms of basically warm air and hot water. The apse effect is maintained to 2 conical structures which are connected by the main inner mall, which can be a garden or a promenade with public activities going on. Then we apply the same idea on different diagrams. So this is a straightened kind of apse effect where you have the south sun penetrating inside the building. This was for the Chesapeake Bay. So we had a natural slope where we put the greenhouses, feeding again food and energy to the community. This was for a Nevada landscape and climate, where the side of the hill exposed to the south is terrace. A membrane is put above the terraces, so you have the greenhouse condition where you cultivate vegetables mainly, and then the greenhouse penetrates uninterruptedly within the community. Same idea when you take the conical structure and you straighten it. You gain something, you lose something. This was designed for Regina in Saskatchewan. This is a railroad yard in the middle of the city. So we suggested that a building would be constructed, an arcology, where you have the greenhouses developed on terraces, which are covering the garages and storages, warehousing places. The greenhouses would penetrate into the building. The building would have its own typical cut to let the winter sun penetrate in. And the climate is very rough there. It goes down to below 60 in the winter. It's very, very windy, constantly windy, but it's very sunny. So we have a condition of aridity and sunshine, which is the ideal condition for this notion. You save water by cultivation under glass or any kind of membrane, and you transform the climate into a more human climate by a greenhouse. And you shelter yourself from the wind. There was another model for a very rough climate where the membrane would penetrate into the town, let's say. And in this case, you would have the psychological advantage of defining a garden which could be green all year round. But here you would have to add energy with some other resource like timber, leftovers, or coal, or fossil fuels. The idea of the dam returning in this diagram, it's somehow the typical section or shape of a dam would be very easily adapted if it's facing south. So again, you have the greenhouses connecting into the community. We did some calculations. We find out how much energy was falling on the buildings, how much could be captured, how much could be used. And now we're developing more detailed information about the Arcosanti structure. This was a village. It ended up by being a village for an Indian region because we had a young architect from India, and he developed this as if it were its own village. It's a 7 or 8 story building, so technology, very simple technology, where again the shape is such as to have this main greenhouse throughout the building of the town, and then the main greenhouse developing on the south slope. Again, when you have a condition of aridity, the water becomes precious, so the use of water in the greenhouse, it's a very good way of going about cultivation. The idea of a floating arcology where you could follow the sun very easily by very little use of energy, because it would be very easy to turn the building following the sun, synchronized with the sun cycle. I added the idea of the iceberg, where you get fresh water for people and vegetables. You get a refrigeration unit, very substantial, and you get also a very crazy playground. And last, before I show you the new model of Arcosanti, the idea of space. This was an idea that developed in the 50s, a cylinder with vegetation lining the cylinder. The cylinder rotates, so you have a local gravity. and you're within this inner landscape. Now, in this kind of notion, many of the elements which are in the terrestrial city are exasperated, but they're still there. Cooperation, interdependence, reliance, innerness, complexity, militarization, and so on. They're all there, present, but as I was saying, in a much more intense way. When Gerald O'Neill came up with his cylinder, I was asked to respond to it, so I wrote a paper and I made a new model. The notion of the paper was that basically we're going in space not for technological reasons, but for theological reasons. The mind and the spirit has to colonize the cosmos. So in this new model, which is a barrel rotating on this axis, instead of having basically one landscape, I have 7 landscapes, one enveloped into the next. So there is a water landscape on top of a technological landscape, which is mainly warehouses and other devices. Then the green hanging landscape receiving light from the water reflection, where you cultivate basically foodstuff. Then a landscape connected with the urban landscape, which is hanging and protruding into the next landscape, which is again for the purpose of giving an outdoor life to the community, and then a technological axial landscape where you have almost zero gravity. And this was a quick model of Barcosanti. As soon as we moved the sun into it, the typical section with the slot, the building, the existing buildings, and then this model was developed into the next model, which is this one. The greenhouses on the slope that you have seen, that the swimming pool is there, the stage was down there. Those are the existing buildings. It's a 24-story building with a main major mall at this level. The greenhouse feeds, as I was saying, vegetables and energy to the building. There are 2 cycles, a winter cycle and a summer cycle. The winter cycle, if I find it, works basically this way. You have an intake of cold, dry air at the bottom of the greenhouses. The air warms up, rises through the greenhouses and rises through the building, which has also its own greenhouses. So you have this chimney effect conveying the warm air throughout the building. In the summer, you reverse the procedure. You open the gates on top where you have a continuous greenhouse. You have an intake of hot, dry air. The dry air is humidified to evaporative cooling. It becomes heavy and cool, so it drops throughout and it cools the building out. The building accumulates energy, so in both cases it gives back with a certain time lapse what has been collected before. This is the slope on the northeast side in the little canyon. As I was saying, we occupy only 2% of the land that we have, and by concentrating the activities of the habitat within such a small place, we have a pedestrian condition, we have immediate connection between the urban condition, the let's say agricultural condition, and the wilderness that surrounds it. The automobile doesn't exist. It's parked at the edge of the city. And between what we have now and what we intend to do, we have to build a few more structures so that we can move more of us up on the site. So this is a crescent with 14 units developed around a theater, outdoor theater. So that we are attempting, even on a very small scale, with a few hundreds of people involved, to focus the activities of the community, not just on technology or production and marketing, but also culture. So the theater would be for children's, as a playground, for nursing school and so on, would be also for meetings of the community, marketing maybe once a week or once a month, open market, and then conferences, concerts and so on. Those are the vaults which have been built. This has been built. It's one of the residences with the office that's been built. It's the lab building. So now yesterday we were excavating in this area, and today and tomorrow and Monday we are excavating this area with a bulldozer. And naturally we need more money. So we are trying to raise money in many ways. Yeah.
What about wildlife in the future? Where's it
Can you ask it at the end? We're almost at the end. This was some kind of resume of a situation that is somehow existent in the megalopolis, in a flat city, and this is a condition that possibly could develop for another situation, the ecology situation: bigness, smallness, exploitation, fitness, segregation, integration, matter, mind, power, authority, destruction, conservation, pollution and pollution, entropy, asyntropy, endless intensity, Eden short, post-Eden, fragmented, structured, exclusive, interiorized, complicated, complex, bureaucratic, performing, opulent, frugal, greedy, cultural, incongruous, and congruous. Now, as I was saying, we are trying to get people to come and help. And we have 10 workshops going on from January until November. And this year we're mainly building the crescent. We're finishing the swimming pool, and then we're going to do landscaping and so on. And I have some sketches and some posters available. Now, if you like to ask some questions when we put the lights on.